Angela Sylvaine, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
We have, and it was easy invite because we love a good book deal, and you, after many many credits, a whole shelf full of credits in short fiction, you have your first book deal.
That's right. Yeah. As you mentioned, I've been writing short fiction for a while and just signed a contract for my first full-length novel. So very exciting.
Terrific. And tell us the title and the publisher.
So it's titled Frostbite, and the publisher is Dark Matter Inc., which is an imprint of Dark Matter magazine, who publishes science fiction, dark fantasy, and horror.
And tell us how it all came about. Is this something that had been in the works for a while? Had you been in conversation with them? Are they somebody you have had a relationship with some of your short fiction and just happened to pitch this as well? Give us a sense of how this came about.
Sure. Well, I was familiar with Dark Matter magazine because they produce very good short fiction. But I wasn't aware they were starting a book imprint.
Hmm.
And so I had actually been working on this particular story that inspired Frostbite for a while. It actually started as a short story and then became a novella. And ultimately, I pitched it as a novella. So I actually did a pitch on Twitter. So many folks are familiar with some of the Twitter pitch promotions that happen throughout the year. And this one is hashtag #PitDark for dark fiction. So I had pitched it as a novella and got a immediate response from them. The editor-in-chief reached out to me and requested a full on the manuscript. And then we started conversations. And in those conversations, he really felt that the story could be a lot bigger. And really loved the characters and the setting. And we brainstormed some ways to expand it and make it into a novel. So ultimately, that's what we're doing. So I'm working on rewrites right now, but have signed the contract to produce it as a novel for Dark Matter Inc.
And it'll be out in the fall of 2023.
That's right. 10/10/23 is the release date.
How much longer did the story get from going from novella to full novel? Maybe you haven't finished it yet, but is it a 20% increase or?
Well, it was, I think, probably close to 30,000 words as a novella, but my goal is probably to get it closer to 80,000 so that it's really a marketable commercial fiction novel. And right now I'm well on my way to that point, so I should easily be able to hit that number, and working through rewrites with the editor. So yeah, it's pretty fun actually expanding a story that I really like to make it a full novel.
We'll get into the story in a second, and I want to dive into some of the plot elements a little bit and all that. But have you actually written a full-length novel before that just hasn't found a publisher? Is this unusual for you to? Because I know you have so many short fiction credits and poetry credits, things like that.
Yeah, I actually, when I started writing, I wrote novels as a new writer. So way back in 2014, I think was actually the first RMFW conference I ever attended. And at that time, I was writing young adult novels, dark young adult novels, science fiction, dark fantasy. And I hadn't quite totally found my voice yet in horror. So I've probably written maybe 3 young adult novels, and had done some pitching and submitting of those, and had always gotten good feedback, but never managed to publish anything through the traditional channels related to those novels. And that's when I took a break and really focused on short fiction. So I've been doing that the past couple of years. And now picking back up with the novel work. So the nice part about that is I feel like I have a good base of understanding on kind of the elements that make a novel work. So it's been relatively smooth so far in expanding that framework.
Fantastic. Well, let's set up Frostbite a little bit. Tell us what it's about.
Sure. So how I pitched it and kind of what got the interest was, this is like the creature comedy of the movie Critters, if you've seen that movie, and the wintry small town heart of Fargo. So if you combine those two things, that's Frostbite. So it's a retro 90s sci-fi horror comedy. So kind of a genre mashup.
Wow. Wow. Comedy and horror, they do coexist, don't they?
Yeah, I like comedy and horror because it gives you a little breathing room. My hope with this book is that it will make you laugh, it will scare you, and maybe make you cry a little too. There's going to be some sad parts. So hoping it makes readers feel all those things.
Yeah. And it is set in North Dakota, correct?
It is, yeah. I actually grew up in North Dakota, so I have a lot of experience with that setting. And the main character, her name is Raylene, and she's a recent high school graduate in a small town in North Dakota. And she's looking forward to getting away from the cold, getting away from the kind of small town jerks, as she thinks of them, and going off to college because she's gotten a scholarship. But her plans are kind of derailed because her mother is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and she's kind of forced to surrender her scholarship and take what she views as a dead-end job at a gas station in this small town. So then one night, her next hope for escape is she sees a shooting star and she makes a wish on it. But that doesn't really work out so well because it's actually a meteor streaking across the sky, and it crashes into the frozen field behind the trailer park where she and her mother live. So she goes to check it out, and black sludge slithers from this rock and seeps into the ground and awakens the hibernating prairie dog colony that is there, and transforms these adorable little creatures into rabid beasts. So then she, along with her best friend, Nate, has to figure out how to stop these creatures and save her town.
Yeah, you better save the town. I mean,
she likes it more than she admits, I think.
Yeah. And now isn't anybody else curious about this meteor? Does anybody else wonder what crashed through the night sky?
Yep, there's definitely some of that. So the start of the book is kind of the meteor frenzy in the town. As you can imagine, you've got military and press and townspeople all very curious about this, but they don't really understand the implications right away, nor does she. They all just think it was kind of a cool meteor landing that put their little small town on the map. But she realizes relatively quickly something is going on when she sees prairie dogs running around in the middle of winter, which is not typical because especially in a place like North Dakota where it's so cold, they do hibernate. So she kind of realizes something's wrong here, and that becomes even more apparent when the prairie dogs start attacking.
So the winter gives us the frost part of the frostbite title, and the prairie dog gives us the bite part of the frostbite title.
That's right.
Very good. Wow. Is it based on your hometown? Is the town based on your hometown?
Yeah, some of it. I pulled some of the locations from my hometown and other places in North Dakota and Minnesota. It's kind of a mishmash. I'm sort of inventing my own town. That way I won't offend anyone.
Yeah.
And also I can make it a little unreal. I can make it a place that has its own sort of personality and is a character in and of itself. I really love stories like that. I mean, obviously, Stephen King is probably the biggest example of Castle Rock being a place where, all these crazy things happen. So that's kind of my goal too, is to make this town really a character in itself and set it up for things to take place there that maybe you wouldn't see anywhere else.
You'll be milking the setting for a long time to come, in other words.
Well, I'm leaving that option open.
Yeah. Yeah. Did the movie Fargo get North Dakota right?
I think so. I do know a few people who don't like that movie, but from my hometown. Yeah. I grew up about an hour north of Fargo.
Oh, wow.
In a town called Grand Forks.
Wow.
And I think it is very accurate but some people think I think it hits too close to home for them, you know? But
Wow.
there's definitely that way people speak, just the general culture, the way the place looks, the real politeness.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
certainly was my experience growing up. And I lived there through college. So,
Wow. I've been to Fargo. I mean, and I was there in the winter. I don't remember anything colder ever. Anything. I mean, I don't know, with the wind, something about it just biting,
yes,
biting cold.
that's right. It's really bad. And I will say, when I first moved to Colorado, you know, up there, you have to plug your car in. It gets so cold, your
Yeah.
engine will freeze and your gas lines will freeze.
Right. Right.
And so when I moved down to Colorado, I had a plug hanging out the front of my car, and I
Mhm.
had people keep asking me if I drove an electric car
Yeah.
because no one knew. You don't have
Right.
to do that around
Right.
here.
Right. Yeah. And they're sort of nonplussed by the cold up there. It's just kind of like, it's cold.
Yep, it's just the way of life.
Yeah.
Very few snow days. You know, here we get school canceled sometimes for weather. Up there, very rare.
Yeah. Can you trace your interest in dark fiction back to high school before that?
Yeah, I think it was honestly pretty early on. I certainly started reading adult like horror books younger than I probably should have, which many of us did. But if I had to trace back, my very first experience with horror would probably be, I actually remember us being assigned the short story The Lottery
Oh, yeah.
by Shirley Jackson in
Yeah.
school. And I mean, that is still a vivid memory to me of the most impactful story I had read up to that point. So I don't know if that was the turning point, but then I also would buy books at the thrift store, you know, for like a dime or a nickel. And Stephen King was definitely high up on that list. So I read a lot of Stephen King, again, probably younger than I should have. So certainly that probably affected my preference for some of the darker things.
Did you have to read in private and keep the titles hidden from your folks or anything like that? Or were they cool with whatever?
No, I'm a Gen Xer, so we generally had parents that just let us do our own thing, and that was certainly true of mine. You know, it was like as long as you're not getting into trouble, you do whatever you're doing. So I had my own little kind of bookshelf in my room where I had my books, and they honestly did not pay much attention to what I was reading. I don't think they just figured it was probably good that I was reading and
Yeah.
staying out of trouble.
And what about creating fiction? When did you think, well, okay, well, I've read enough. Now I want to see if I can do this myself.
You know, that came pretty late for me, honestly. I guess it never crossed my mind that I could do it. As much as I was a really voracious reader and have been my whole life, I don't know that anyone ever said, like, hey, you can write too. Until I was probably in my like early to mid 30s. And I had a part time person who I worked with at my day job who was a writer.
Hmm.
And they worked part time so that they'd have health insurance. And we would always talk about the books we were reading. And one day she said to me, why don't you try writing?
Hmm.
And then I
Interesting.
did. So, and I kind of never looked back. It appealed to me immediately. And I sort of wondered why I had never thought of it before.
Wow. What did you attempt first? A short story, or what did you?
No, I dove straight into novels. Honestly, I kind of wish I had attempted short stories first. Although it was a really great learning experience. If I
Yeah.
had it to do over, I probably would have tried short stuff because novels are tough.
Yeah.
You know, I think not that you have to write by the rules, but there's sort of a lot of rules and structure for a novel to work well. And so it's really easy to do it badly to start, which
Yeah.
doesn't feel very good. You know, so it was a bit of a trial by fire, I suppose, and I learned a lot. But writing, you know, that's kind of part of why I transitioned more to writing short stories is, as I'm sure many listeners can identify with, it can feel pretty tough to be in the query trenches and be getting rejections all the time, especially when something took you a year to create.
Right. Right.
So when I kind of shifted to writing short stories and found that I felt really good about it because I could finish something, in a week or a month or 2 months. And I was done. And now I had this thing I was done with, and I didn't spend a year on it. And then I started submitting those things to magazines and podcasts and things. And occasionally I'd get an acceptance. So there was still a lot of rejection, but I had some positive reinforcement. And so I think it really kind of reinvigorated my passion. And additionally, sort of helped me get a little more hardy against rejection as well, because when you're submitting so many things at one time, it gets a lot easier to get a rejection. If you have 10 pieces out and one comes back, there's still 9 out there,
Right.
and you can resubmit that one. So it's really not so bad.
Well, and you've done another thing I noticed, and I think is a very smart move. If anybody else out there wants to follow it, I think it's a pretty good strategy, which is now you have, I don't know, short stories in, I didn't count them all up, 15, 20 different anthologies. There's quite a few.
Yeah.
And so when you go to your Amazon page or your website or whatever, first it looks like you're active, which you are. You're engaged. There's current stuff going out. The definitely shows a very consistent theme in your writing in terms of what you're interested in. And it just looks like you're a going concern.
Yeah, it's a good way to keep readers and other people in the industry to keep in front of them. So that's the other thing, is you kind of can develop a reputation. People are gonna be paying attention to what you're doing, and you're putting things out more regularly, so you don't have these big gaps. And I think that's something I want to continue to do, really, is even if I shift focus and I'm working on novels, it's always good to also put out short stories and other things in the interim so that you stay in front of people. And it's also just good from an idea standpoint. I mean, Frostbite started as a short story, so it's a great way to just kind of explore some different things and see what you like before you really make the commitment of expanding it into a novel. So that part's really good from a creative standpoint as well.
That's great. That is really great. What percentage of short stories are accepted, would you say? Are you mentioned 10% or something like that? Do you think that's about right?
That's probably about right. In any given year, I probably range between 10 and 20%. 20 is really great. 10 is a little more average for me, maybe. This year in particular has been a really good year for me. I've had more acceptances than I ever have before. And I think really it's just because I was writing so much and submitting. When you have 10 or 15 things out at a time, you're going to get those acceptances. And so I'll probably get to the point, I think here I'm pretty close now to having stories in maybe 30 publications. And I have another half dozen coming out this year.
Wow.
Plus some poems. And so it's just really, it just kind of keeps you in front of people. And additionally, it'll be good for me too, because I'm not really writing short stories right now since I'm working on my novel, but I'm going to stay in front of readers. So if I can kind of continue this and keep getting my short stories out there, they'll still have something to read from me until my novel comes out.
Fantastic. Wow. You mentioned Twitter a while back. I want to talk about that for a minute. You mentioned you went on Twitter, and that's how you kind of got hooked. You got picked up by your publisher. And again, it's another example, I think, of somebody who, some people don't want to engage in Twitter, don't want to do what they say. Maybe they feel like they're not ready yet or something, but it sounds like you've been at it for a while and familiar with how to use it and using it as a two-way communication vehicle, and with success, obviously. When did you first get into Twitter, and what do you tell other friends who are skeptical?
I've been on Twitter for several years now, might be maybe 4 years or something like that. And I certainly felt that same way when I joined. It can feel overwhelming. But I think my biggest tip is to just remember that people want to interact with you, whether it be other industry people or other authors or readers. They just kind of want to see a little bit of your personality in addition to kind of knowing when you have stuff coming out. So I just try to be genuine. I post about books. I post about my own announcements of things that are coming out, but I also post about books I love that I'm reading. I post about my cats. I post about food, those just things I like. And so those are sort of just personal things to me that are genuinely things I like. And then I think the biggest tip is to just make it, like you said, a two-way street. I think what doesn't work on Twitter is sole promotion. So if you go on there and all you do is promote your work, people aren't going to respond to that.
Right.
I know I don't, as someone that's consuming Twitter, I don't want to be constantly pitched to. So that's also the approach I take, is don't overdo it with the promotion, and legitimately connect with other people, congratulate them on their successes, reach out to them on Twitter if you liked their book, interact with them about other stuff. If they post a movie you really liked, comment back, I loved that movie and here's why. So make it a relationship, and you'll start to form those kind of connections on Twitter. And what I do to make it a little more manageable is you can actually set your notifications. So when you're following a lot of people on Twitter, so for example, I'm probably following 5,000 people on Twitter, but I can curate what I see by choosing the people that have become my friends that I interact with. I can set it so I see all their notifications. So I sort of have this separate notification feed where I can slim down what I see and only check in on that, here and there. But I know I'm going to see the things from the people I like, the people that are fans, the people that have supported me. And so that makes it a little more manageable.
Yeah. And I use lists a lot, which is just building a list of different topics or areas or writer friends or whatever it might be. And then you just go to that list and you've suddenly turned Niagara Falls into just a little trickle. And it's, if you have 20 friends on that list and they each have a couple of tweets a day, you can quickly absorb what's happening. So
exactly right.
Yeah. And you must be very, kind of feel good about the fact that you started up your Twitter account, because who knows, maybe frostbite wouldn't be a thing.
That's right.
If it, so.
Yep, that is very true. And I will say, I've told this, my friend Alexis, who I actually met in a writing class through Reactor, but we initially only communicated on Twitter. We were basically Twitter friends. She is the one who encouraged me to pitch. So I wasn't actually going to pitch that day. And she messaged me and said, hey, isn't Pit Dark going on today? Are you going to pitch? And I was like, oh, I don't know. It's a novella. I'm not sure anyone will want it. I wasn't planning on it. And she said, I think you should. I've seen a couple of other novellas out there. And so I did.
Yeah.
And when if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have a book deal. So I think that's also a good lesson in, like, take your shot, however, minute the chances might be. If nothing else, it'll be good practice, right? Writing short pitches is a good thing to know how to do quickly.
Yep.
So if nothing else, it'll teach you how to do that. And you might just be one of the ones that gets lucky.
Yeah. Yep. And what do you have to lose? What did it cost?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I've seen Lit Reactor. I'm not sure I know exactly what that is. What is Lit Reactor?
They do like writing courses. So it's great for anyone, particularly writers that are starting out, but even more seasoned writers, if there's a topic you really want to cover. They have writing classes that are normally structured over, I think it's about 6 weeks, where you have an instructor who will do sort of a class each week and some materials. They'll give you some stories to read, and then you write a story every week. So you have to produce a story every week and submit it for critique. And then the people in your group give you feedback. So it's excellent because you're being forced to write a lot over a 6-week period, and you're getting a lot of feedback. Probably at least, half a dozen people are looking at every single story you write. So you get to the end of that 6 weeks, and now you have half a dozen stories with feedback that you can expand or do other things with. And I will give a plug. I think Reactor is actually doing a Kickstarter right now. So anyone who wants to make sure those classes continue and really loves them should check it out. The class I took was from one of my favorite teachers and authors. Her name is Gwendolyn Keist. So a little pitch for Lit Reactor.
That's great. That's great. So I know I've seen you, and you're very active around the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers for many, many years. And you also got picked up in several RMFW short story anthologies, correct?
I did, yeah.
How important was that for you to be, selected to be part of that?
I think it was great. Truly, it's such a pleasure to be in with that group that I have so much respect for. And I think when it comes to submitting short stories, there are markets out there that are extremely hard to get into, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so submitting to a local anthology, while still very competitive, is likely going to be a little easier to get into than like a national magazine, just because it's restricted to the only people that can submit are members. So you automatically have a little bit higher chance of making it. Right. Which can be really great because it kind of helps you get your foot in the door, helps you get your first couple publications, and then you can maybe move on to those bigger things where 500 or 1,000 people are submitting at one time, and your chances are a little bit lower.
Yeah. Did you submit? I should know this because they've already announced who's in the new one. Do you have a short story in Bizarre Bazaar?
I don't. I did not submit this time. Okay. Partially because my work over time has gotten darker. And so I find it's not always a great fit for a mixed genre anthology.
Gotcha.
Usually the horror in a mixed genre anthology maybe needs to be a little more, a little less severe potentially to be palatable to the audience that would read that kind of anthology. So that's really the only reason why I didn't submit. I love those and I'll read it for sure, but it's probably gotten to the point where I'm a little more firmly rooted in horror, and so maybe not quite as good of a fit.
Yeah, it's smart to know and target your submissions and know what you're shooting for. Yep, that's great. I want to ask you about another one of your credits, and that's Chopping Spree. I have to carefully pronounce that, Chopping Spree.
Yes, so that was my debut novella, which came out last year, just about last April, I think it was. And so that one was kind of my first standalone book, not in a collection with others. And you can tell I love writing retro things. That one is 80s retro. So it has references to mall culture and a lot of 80s things that I love because that was really my formative years. And it's a slasher. So it's about a group of kids that gets stuck in a mall overnight and are trying to escape a killer, but there's far more to it. So there's sort of grander schemes going on than they realize.
Aha. And it said on there, and I didn't understand this, Rewind or Die, book 27.
Yes. So the publisher is called Unnerving Press, and they have a series called Rewind or Die. And the whole idea behind it is that it's horror that's kind of inspired by the videotape age, by the VHS age.
Rewind or Die.
Yeah, so if you like that kind of thing, and I love their books, I actually had read several that I really enjoyed, and that's why I decided to write one and submit one to them, because I loved their work so much. A couple of my favorites of theirs, a new writer kind of on the indie scene that I love, Haley Piper. She wrote Benny Rose, the Cannibal King is one of the Rewind or Die books. And that was probably one of the first books I read that hooked me on novellas. I just love reading that length.
Yeah,
And V. Castro has another one in that series that I love. There's just several excellent books in that series. Chopping Spree, I hope you read, but check out the rest too, because they're all great.
that's great. That's great. So you have such a busy writing life. Do you have a full-time job also?
I do. Yep. I have a full-time day job. Um, I'm a project manager in my day job. So I do get to work from home, which is nice and
Yeah.
allows me to kind of, flex my schedule a little bit related to writing time. The downside of that is I do spend a lot of time at this desk because I don't have a work office. This is it.
Uh,
And this is where I do my writing too. But
wow.
it's okay. It's still
Yeah.
great.
Yep. Wow. Do you have a daily routine in terms of producing fiction?
Yeah, when I'm doing mostly short work, I don't write a lot during the week. I'm definitely someone who likes to write in big chunks of time. So for like a half day Saturday and the whole
Hmm.
day Sunday is kind of my general writing schedule when I'm
Yep.
doing short fiction. But right now, because I'm on a deadline and I really need to produce quicker, I might write for, an hour and a half or 2 hours in the evening, in
Mm.
addition to writing on weekends.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it hard to go from that work head to the creative head? Do you need a break?
Um, it can be, but it's not too bad. I think, one of the things that I do is sort of set the stage with music and things like that. I know that there are other writers who do that. I don't listen to a lot of things while I'm at my day job because I'm often on calls, on Zoom meetings and things like that. So when I write, I tend to kind of put on a soundtrack, and I think that helps me switch my brain a little bit to be
Yep.
more of a creative brain.
Yep. Care to pass along any recommendations for tunes, writing
Um,
tunes?
I don't know if you have, I like ambient
Uh-huh.
tunes that are a little darker. And
Uh-huh.
so I don't know if you're familiar with the show Killing Eve,
Oh, absolutely.
but it has an incredible soundtrack. So
Yeah,
that is one of my favorite things to listen to writing right now is probably the Killing Eve soundtrack. It's
music,
excellent.
the music choices on that show were phenomenal.
They're
Yeah.
so good.
And a lot of obscure stuff I did not
Yeah,
know.
I
Yeah.
know. I
But
know.
catchy and kind of moody. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Moody, which is exactly what I'm going for. So
They have a Killing Eve song list on Spotify that goes on and on and on.
it's a
Yeah.
lot. The artist that did most of that work, and I can't remember their name off the top of my head right now, but they have a lot of music out there. So you
Yeah.
can definitely go on Spotify or build a large playlist just from them. So
Yeah. So the little dark music to match the dark writing.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Or sometimes if I want to go a little more comedy, I might throw on some 80s music because I
Mhm.
am kind of an 80s baby. An 80s mix for me will put me in a little bit more of an upbeat state of mind. So that's another way I can go with it.
Yeah. Wow. Neat. Can you explain, do you, and maybe you don't care, or maybe you don't even give it much thought, but can you explain why horror is so fascinating to you and what you're trying to accomplish with it? I mean, I don't ask this question of romance writers or cozy mystery writers or mystery writers. It just is what it is. It's not like you have to have a reason, but I've seen you characterize yourself as a cheerful goth, I think.
Yes,
Um,
that's right.
so, but where does this come from? And are you, I mean, I guess the old cliche question might be, are you trying to process something, Angela?
Well, certainly. I think we all do in our fiction, whether we know it or not. Our own little hangups make their way in there always, I think, no matter what you write. But certainly, I think horror in particular helps us process the dark things in the world. Um, and so I think that's true of me for sure. There are things that will pop up in my writing, not that it's always about me, but there will be little things. Like, for example, I grew up in a home where there was domestic violence. So you'll just occasionally, I'm not usually going to write a whole story about that, but you might just see a little mention of it, or someone that's dealing with kind of the implications of that. And I think that's a way you work through it mentally, right? Some of this baggage you have certainly comes out. And I think for readers, and there's many people who have said this much smarter than me, and I agree with them, I think it's a way to kind of process the horrors of the world, but in a safe way, right? When people say that sales of horror go up when bad things are going on in the world, readers tend to want to see more horror. And I think that's because horror in a book is something you can wrap your mind around. You can like watch someone fight that monster and potentially win. Or even if they don't, it's a manageable world where the horror makes sense and it has rules. And in our world, that isn't always the case. So maybe that's why people like it. But yeah.
Wow, very well said. Is there any, well, I'm sure there is some topics you won't read about or won't watch, because there always are, but is there any limit to what you can take in on those?
Yeah. And I think everybody has limits. We all have our triggers, right? I have a friend who animal death, that's a hard no for them, right? For me, I would say sexual assault is not anything I ever want to read about. So which is part of why I think I like the trend of content warnings, trigger warnings. You don't have, especially when they're just at the back of the book or something, that way the reader has the power to say, if I want to check, I can check. And then I know, and I can make an informed decision. And if I don't want to check and I don't care, I don't have to. But certainly that has helped me out where I've been thinking about reading a book, and I actually will often look it up on Goodreads just to kind of get an idea what it's about and see maybe just a little bit of comments, what people are saying. And if I see some kind of mention of, well, this has sexual assault in it, I know for sure I'm not going to read that.
Yeah.
It's just not for me. And from a writing standpoint, that I would say that's the same, but there certainly is stuff I don't prefer to get into, stuff with children and stuff like that just doesn't appeal to me. I don't write extreme horror, that's like extremely gory and grotesque. It's just not my style, but some people like that and they like to write it and read it, and more power to them. I think we all should have our preferences and read what we want.
Yep. Very good. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot with one question I gave you a heads up on, but this one I did not. As we kind of wrap up here, of all the short stories you've got out there that people can easily access and go read, what's the one short story from Angela Sylvaine that we should go track down and read?
I would say one of my favorites is called The Cyclone Sisters Traveling Circus of Wonders. And that comes to the top of my mind partially because it was just reprinted on a podcast. So it was initially printed in a magazine, and I'm trying to remember which one. Dark Moon Digest. It was originally printed in Dark Moon Digest, and the No Sleep podcast just did it in their new season. So if you look up the No Sleep podcast, season 18, episode 1, it'll be on there. And I have to say, I listened to it, and the audio performance scared me. I was like, this story is scary. Something about hearing it as opposed to reading it made me realize it was actually a really scary story. Wow. So maybe that's like, let's not have false modesty. I like that one of mine. So it was cool to see it kind of performed and take shape in real life.
Awesome. Is the No Sleep podcast available for free?
It sure is. Yep.
Okay, great.
Wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm on it. Well, and then the final question as we wrap up here, and Angela, thank you so much for all your time. As we wrap up, we'd like to always shine a light on another author or maybe a favorite book of yours, something you want to just pass along, pay it forward a little bit.
Sure. I would say one of my most recent favorites is really my favorite author right now in all things is Stephen Graham Jones, who many people are familiar with. He's from Colorado, so we get to claim him a little bit. But I just think he's incredible. He has such voice. And his book, My Heart is a Chainsaw, is really a love letter to horror movies. So if you're a horror movie fan, read it. It's excellent. It's the kind of a twist on a slasher. And this idea that the final girl doesn't have to be perfect, which is sort of one of those horror tropes that's overdone. So yeah, he's probably my number one top favorite author right now.
He's such a super nice guy too. He is
I
just,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, he really is. He deserves all of his success.
Yeah, yep. Well, Angela, Sylvaine, best of luck with Frostbite, and maybe we can get you back on around publication time and find out about all the changes and improvements in Frostbite and everything you've learned in the, year plus since this chat. So
Sounds great. I would love that.
all right. Well, thanks again, Angela.
Thank you.